right, let's try this another time because my internet failed. So let's go over from lateral folding to how do we create like the tube-like structure of our body. So remember from the last part that you hopefully watched is that we have our flattened embryo that's starting to fold towards our ventral surface. And as it folds towards our ventral surface, we're going to create the outer tube of the body. And then the outer tube is going to have stuff in the middle of it, which is going to be tubes from the dorsal to the ventral side in a specific order. So hopefully you kind of filled that out on the last picture. And now what you can do is go through here and you can label and draw everything. So the first thing I'm going to label is I have two lines here to represent the fact that I have my amniotic cavity. And my amniotic cavity remember goes around my entire embryo. So as it goes around my entire embryo, it also will end up going around my entire fetus later on in the future. But I want you to see that as you roll up ventrally, the amniotic cavity goes all the way around the embryo, and that's why it ends up going all the way around the fetus in the future. Then we're going to start to draw our tubes. Okay, so I'm going to draw my purple tube that's in the back here. Remember, my purple tube is my dorsal hollow nerve tube. Make sure my words are far enough apart. Nerve tube. It can also be a cord. Tube and cord are the same thing. Remember, you want to think about what this is made from. Why isn't it blue? It's purple because I made my neural ectoderm purple. And then my next structure is not a tube, it's a solid rod. And that solid rod we're going to make red because it's from mesoderm. And that is my notochord. Okay. Then my next structure is my dorsal aorta. So I'm going to kind of draw a nice sort of semi-big circle like that. And that forms my dorsal aorta. So the dorsal aorta is forming from the splanchnic mesoderm. You have two of them, and those two eventually merge together to create one big circle, which is the dorsal aorta. The dorsal aorta is the major artery in the body that supplies to like the upper, really it's going to supply all the stuff from the heart below. And my last tube then should be my gut tube. So that's going from dorsal to ventral. So we're just going to fill in our middle parts. Remember, on the lateral side, we're going to draw kind of a nice big circle, and that circle is going to represent my somite. So basically what I'm saying is I'm cutting my embryos at the right spot. So my segmental structure of my somite, I'm cutting through and I can see it. Remember, since the somites are segmental, if I cut in front of it or behind it, I won't see that somite. And then I'm going to kind of create a nice kind of big block. And that big block that's lateral to my somite is my intermediate mesoderm. And the intermediate mesoderm is also a specific block of mesoderm that starts and stops, and then starts and stops and starts and stops. So that's why it's segmental. And that is going to be like more posterior. It's actually back behind the lateral plate mesoderm. We're going to learn later that that's going to make stuff that is retroperitoneal, but don't worry so much about that for now. The hardest part of drawing this is what do you do with your lateral plate mesoderm? Because it's kind of weird, right? The lateral plate mesoderm split into an upper part and a lower part, and then we created the celome between. This I find is the hardest part for me to draw, and sometimes the hardest part for you guys to figure out too. So it's easier just to, right underneath the dorsal aorta, you're just going to draw a line that goes all the way across the body of the embryo. And then you're going to follow the epidermal ectoderm all the way around to that line. Like hopefully your line is straight. Mine's a little crooked. My little Wacom tablet is not the greatest in terms of its touch note, okay? This is going to be my somatic mesoderm. How do I know that's my somatic mesoderm? Because this outer black layer here is my epidermal ectoderm. Remember, the somatic mesoderm has to be closest to the epidermal ectoderm. So that's going to help us make body wall structures, specifically the tissue that lines the inside of the body. Then we have to make our splanchnic mesoderm, and if you have a hard time, the splanchnic mesoderm has to be superficial to the gut tube, so that's the splanchnic mesoderm. So remember, the splanchnic mesoderm actually forms part of the dorsal aorta a little bit. Mostly dorsal aorta is from lateral plate mesoderm, but the splanchnic mesoderm has to be like over the gut tube. So remember, it's going to be just above where the endoderm was. So just superficial to the endoderm. So I want to make sure I draw that superficial to the endoderm. And then I told you this tube is sitting inside the celome. So if we go back here, right, we split these two types of mesoderm, and we have the fluid-filled cavity between them. That makes up our celome. That's my celome. The celome is going to be fluid-filled. So remember, if you're a tube inside of that fluid-filled area, it's going to kind of like bounce around and wiggle a little bit. I want to make sure it doesn't wiggle too much, so I'm going to take 2 layers of mesoderm and come down from the back body wall, and 2 layers of mesoderm and come towards the front body wall. And that's going to create a transsegmental structure that goes all the way from like the head to the tail end of the gut tube, securing the gut tube in place. So those 2 layers create mesenteries, and these 2 layers create the mesenteries. Since this one goes to the back body wall and that's dorsal, this is the dorsal mesentery. Since this one is going towards the front body wall, this is the ventral mesentery. So now you've pretty much labeled everything that you need for your cross-section, except for there's one more thing that we want to consider and think about. And I'm going to do this maybe in a slightly different color, so I kind of try to differentiate where exactly it is. Maybe a black. I hope that works. So when we take this outer epidermal ectoderm layer and the splanchnic mesoderm layer, that becomes my somatopleure. Remember, pleure means 2. Pleural means 2. So I have to have 2 layers. So the somatopleure is going to make up the skin, the torso muscles, plus the lining inside of the body. And then I can take that another kind of black semicircle here, and I go around my splanchnic mesoderm and my endoderm, which I forgot actually to label. This is my gut tube. And that becomes my splanchnopleure. So what the splanchnopleure is the lining of the gut tube plus the muscle around that gut tube plus the superficial tissue that goes on top of the gut tube structures. So you should see that the celome is basically the space between the 2 mesoderm layers that came from lateral plate mesoderm. You see how that's a nice area that we can kind of expand inside of. So as your stomach expands, it has room to grow. As your intestines expand, they have room to grow. As our heart grows, we have an expansion area. As our lungs grow, we have an area for that expansion. So you should be able to draw and label this for an exam, in case I didn't say that for your class. This is something that is very easy for me to ask you to draw and label it. You should be able to draw this and label all of those things. This is something that we try to have you do in lab as well to make sure that you understand how to do that. Why do you need to know this? There is a purpose. And I'll get to that in a minute. I just forgot to differentiate my somite into dermatome, sclerotome, and myotome. So over here, I'm just going to say D equals dermatome, M equals myotome, S equals sclerotome. I just forgot about that. Okay, so there is a reason for you guys to know this, because the basic body plan of the embryo, which is what this is, can also be applied to the adult. So we're going to go back to this cross section here, and we're going to apply that basic body plan to here. The only thing you need to do is first orient yourself to what is dorsal and what is ventral. If you're thinking that's dorsal, well, wait, let's stop and think about that. Remember, dorsal hollow nerve tube is going to be dorsal, and that creates the spinal cord. So the first thing I'm going to do is look for my vertebra, and inside my vertebra is my spinal cord. That's right there, actually. There's my dorsal hollow nerve tube. And then my vertebral body is going to be where my notochord was. My notochord is just going to be replaced by the vertebra. And then part of it remains as the intervertebral disc. And then if you're like, oh my gosh, there's two tubes, how do I know which is which? Well, this tube is first and closer to the body of the vertebra. That's dorsal aorta. And then you're going to kind of remember to continue in your line. So dorsal hollow nerve tube, notochord, dorsal aorta, and then I have another tube right here. That's my gut tube. Actually, this is my gut tube. This is part of my gut tube. That's part of my gut tube. That's part of my gut tube. That's part of my gut tube. This is actually a vein, and we'll learn that when we get to 2240. So you should be able to follow this pattern, even though it might be kind of off kilter a little bit. Dorsal hollow nerve tube, notochord, dorsal aorta, gut tube. Try to find some cross sections online. Look for some of the cross sections that maybe are in other PowerPoints, and try to do this. Especially for the chest area, the thorax area, it's a little bit more complicated, okay? So I might put another picture in here for you guys as a supplement to go through. So far, sorry. So far, what we've done is, in all the videos so far, we've figured out how the embryonic process happens, how that lays down the basic body plan for our embryo, and then we now know how to draw and label a basic cross-section for our embryo and how to apply that to an adult. The last part is going to be stuff that I kind of maybe forgot for some classes, which I'll go over, or maybe are more harder concepts for people to understand, and that is to look at foregut, midgut, hindgut stuff, and then also understanding segmental versus transsegmental.